Taste, see, that's pretty simple. Okay. Smell is pretty simple. Taste is just as simple, but these two are actually connected more so than any of our senses, special senses that we have. Um, it's the combinedness between smell and taste that allows us to interpret food, you know, interpret it in such a way that, I like it or I don't like it. But gustation is the sense of taste. It's the fancy word for it. And just like we detected odorants within the nasal cavity, we are detecting these things called tastants here on the tongue. And we're going to primarily talk about the tongue. If you didn't know, we have some taste receptors within the lining of the mouth. We have some taste receptors in the superior pharynx here in the back of the throat region. But a lot of those kind of go away as you get older. We have a ton of more receptors as a infant, in especially that first year of life, compared to as we get older, where they're just predominantly found on the tongue. Water receptors, I guess, are more so in the pharynx as we get older, but in that first year of life, it's dramatically different. It's dramatically different because your primary source of food is breast milk for that first year of life. So, or at least for the first 6 months of life. And then you can start, introducing some very nondescript solid foods, but we're not going to get into that. Come to nutrition class, we talk about it there. Again, these tastants are just chemicals we're going to see. Okay. So again, the sense of taste, just like the sense of smell, is a very fancy pants chemoreceptor. Okay. Detecting various different types of chemicals. Just very, very, very complex. All right. Instead of just a little receptor cell in the, aortic body. All right. Very complex compared to that. These are all found, again, I'm just going to go ahead a picture here, and there you go. There's Mr. Tongue, okay, or Mrs. Tongue. I don't discriminate. But you can see here on Mrs. Tongue, they're all scattered about on the dorsum of this tongue, okay? And that's just the part that we see, okay? You don't have these on the underside, but you really don't put your tongue out and try to taste on the underside of your mouth or the underside of your tongue. That's just weird, right? These various different types of chemoreceptors are housed within what are called papillae. And those specific chemoreceptors are your taste buds. Taste buds are housed within tiny little bumps called papillae. We have 4 different kinds. The first one has no involvement at all when it comes to the sense of taste. All right. There it is. No role in gustation. Okay. But it does give us grip. Okay. Yeah. If you feel the surface of your tongue, and go ahead and feel it. Okay. No one's looking at you. It feels a little rough. If you have a cat, then you know how that surface of the tongue is really damn rough. Okay. For us, filiform papillae are very short, very spiked. Okay, I don't really care. But what do they do? They allow us to grip the food. Okay. They help us manipulate the food. If you didn't have these there, your tongue would be really smooth. Ugh, disturbing. But it wouldn't allow me to keep that food squished in between my teeth. It would let it squirrel away. And I don't want it to squirrel away. I want to keep it right there in between my teeth so I can chew it up. They're scattered all over, but they're primarily in the anterior 2/3, okay? Because that's the area that you're usually manipulating. And next time you start chewing, sit there and think about it, okay? You usually manipulate stuff with the anterior part of your tongue, never the posterior part. It's attached, so... The first papillae that we have here is the fungiform papillae. It's mushroom shaped. I mean, I don't know if that really matters, but it does have a few taste buds, not a lot. Okay. There are some other ones that do that. Valate is really kind of the big daddy when it comes to number of taste buds it houses. These papillae are not as big as those, so they house fewer. They're located at the tip and the sides of the tongue. I guess that's important because some of these are only found in a specific location. So, if I was to ask it in a multiple choice, because there's two of them that are found on the sides of the tongue, only one of them is found towards the front, the very tip of the tongue, and the sides up there, and another one's found towards the back of the tongue. So there are some differences here. So fungiform, tip, and kind of the sides of the tongue there towards the front. Towards the back of the tongue, we have more side, but that's where we find folate. Folate means leaf-like. Okay, foliage is leaves. And I guess this looked like leaves. I don't know. I am nowhere near in a state to think that looks like leaves, but to our first individuals who discovered these things, I guess it did. So there you go. Folate papillae are interesting. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the sense of taste is much more robust, if you will, and dynamic as a child compared to an adult, even though I may have a very sophisticated palate compared to a 11-month-old or 13-month-old, I hope. But these are much more active earlier in childhood than later on. Okay. But this has to go with really, this ability of how I interact with the world is much different than an 8-month-old or a 4-month-old even. Let's go back even further. For me, good and evil, I can see it coming a mile away. Okay, I have enough life experience. I can determine if someone's talking a certain way or acting a certain way. I can make an assumption that they're evil. Okay, or maybe they hit me. There you go. They're evil. An infant doesn't have that life experience, right? It's just crawling around on the floor, right? So where me, if I see something on the floor, I'm be like, I'm not going to put that in my mouth. That doesn't look very good. I'll throw it away. Infant doesn't know that. Infant's like, there's something on the floor. This is good or evil. I don't know. I'm going to stick it in my mouth. So they stick it in their mouth. So obviously they're going to have a much more robust sense of taste. So they're going to have much more greater number of papillae, which is what folate comes into play here. And that's going to bring about more information coming in to allow them, that doesn't taste very good. Okay. And they take it out of their mouth. It's evil. They'll stay away from it next time. So that's how they're interpreting good and evil. Valate and fungiform are our two primary papillae in us. Valate or circumvallate, and I'll try to just put valate on the exam. These are the largest. These have the most taste buds. Okay. Posterior side of the tongue. Posterior side as opposed to out here for folate and fungiform. Valate, they're all back here. Okay, these are valate. Okay. These are valate back here. That's where they're concentrated. The sense of taste is determined all over the tongue. There's not like this is where you do sweet and this is where you do sour. Really, the sense of taste is done all over. Okay. So all of these papillae house all these taste buds, and all these taste buds are scattered honestly all over the map. Okay. Couple more slides, we'll take a break. If we take a highlight view of it, okay, here is what that little taste bud looks like. Okay. Here's the surface of it. And as chemicals dissolve in your saliva, it'll enter into this little taste pore. It's right there. You can see it right there as well. Okay, so this is underneath the epithelium there, or within the epithelium, however you want to visualize it. And that chemical gets in here and triggers the various different types of receptor cells that we have here, or I'm sorry, gustatory cells. Okay. Where odorants, the uh, the olfactory receptor cells, they regenerate basically every 2 months. Good God Almighty, look at these guys. Okay, they only live a couple weeks, week and a half, and then we are constantly turning these over. There is no bigger sense that changes so dramatically over the course of your lifetime than the sense of taste. What you find super tasty at one point in your life, something may happen and it is repulsive to you. Okay. Pregnancy is a huge one in that. All right. For some women, pregnancy just changes their interpretation of how they perceive these tastes. So they do a ton of research on it. It's honestly pretty fascinating, but you can see there is such a high amount of turnover here. Um, Maybe that's why taste can change so dramatically. I've never seen as a reason as to the why. They're always trying to figure it out, and then they don't necessarily know. I don't know if it's how it messes with the brain, with hormones, with pregnancy, and how we interpret stuff, which can be a defense mechanism. I know for a few women I know, they used to drink a certain type of beer prior to being pregnant. After they got pregnant, they didn't drink that anymore. And then when they tried to after they gave birth, it was like repulsive to them. Like a couple of them vomited. They just couldn't handle the taste of it anymore. So, I mean, that's pretty dramatic in just a short amount of time, relatively speaking, where you get this huge dramatic change. And there's been a number of studies come out, and it's pretty interesting if you're curious out there to look into it.
So I have a question about that then.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabby.
So you say like taste changes after pregnancy and all that. Does that also have to do with like allergies? Like how, like before I was pregnant, I wasn't allergic to shellfish, and then after I was pregnant, I was. Like, does
And
that
when it
have
comes
something to
and it possibly can. When it comes to allergies, it doesn't necessarily have to be pregnancy in that regard. I know a
Okay.
lot of women who ate shellfish a lot as a youngster. All of a sudden, one day they woke up, slightly older, and they weren't able to do it at all. And my wife is in that same boat.
So it was just like a
Yeah,
coincidence, like after I was pregnant.
hmm
Gotcha. I
yeah.
just always wondered.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. They don't really understand why that kind of happens too, because she used to always eat shellfish as a child. But as she got older, like around 19, 20, she was out one day and had some shrimp or whatnot, or some shellfish of some sort. I can't remember what she ate. But then all of a sudden, her mouth got tingly, her tongue swelled up, and she didn't eat a whole heck of a lot of it, so it didn't give her a full anaphylactic shock type of event. But
That was basically like the same exact thing that happened when I was
yeah,
19, and then all of a sudden, that's funny.
yeah,
Okay.
it's crazy. I've never seen as a reason to why that is either. And my son, he always used to eat various different types of nuts. But then one night we gave him some walnuts, and he's had them before. But all of a sudden he just went into a huge allergic response. He broke out. Half his face, was mutated. It was huge. He wheezed a little bit. He threw up all over the damn place. We gave him some Sudafed and just kind of monitored him. We didn't take him into the hospital or anything, but as soon as we gave him Sudafed, all the swelling started to come down. His breathing got more back to normal, but he developed it all of a sudden. So how we develop these things, man, I don't know. It's fascinating. That's what fascinates me about the human body. We know so much, and yet we know so little. Especially with the brain, like we know like the regions, and we know Brodmann areas, smaller areas that actually perform some of the duties. And it's like they're all randomly located. But if you even go smaller to that, there's been some research to suggest that they're so highly adaptive. And if we go smaller than a Brodmann area into these individual clump of cells, we're finding that they actually all do it. What the hell? So as we get more and more information, there are more and more and more just open-ended questions as to why. Why does that do that? And so this ability to really truly map every little square footage area of a brain is so difficult, because as the more smaller and precise we are getting with how we can measure neuron activity, they're, and this is just the first I've seen of this study. It's actually a few years old. They're finding that in this one study that the smaller you get, the actual information being processed is much more dynamic and fluid. There's multiple different things being sensed by individual neurons, not necessarily even though it's housed within a specific region when it comes to taste. So there's a lot of, we know a lot of stuff and we don't know a lot of stuff. So it's pretty interesting here. When it comes to a pathway here, guys, it goes from those gustatory cells on the dorsal surface of the tongue. This one does, remember, we have taste on the anterior 2/3 and taste on the posterior 2/3. So we have a couple different cranial nerves involved. That may be something worthy of noting. They will synapse back into the thalamus, and the thalamus, it goes to the thalamus just for one reason, because there's a lot of reflexive activities that they'll be in charge of when it comes to the digestive tract. So that's why it goes there. From the thalamus, it'll head back to our insula, where we interpret our sense of taste. Last couple slides here, and then we'll take a little break. You guys are doing fantastic. It is what these things taste, okay? And they will only make a good multiple choice question, okay? I have a little bit as to how here, but these are your 5 senses, okay? And usually they get asked, okay? Salt, sour, sweet, bitter, umami, okay? You all know what salt is. You all know what sour is. Sweet, bitter, umami is just a savory type of sensation. But this is actually what it's responding to. Sodium and potassium. It responds to those metal ions. NaCl is salt. Okay. You can do potassium chloride as a salt substitute. That's what it binds to. Okay. And, this one here responds to, acids. Vinegar is an acid. Okay. But any type of acid is what these things are going to respond to. So anything acidic, anything associated with sodium or potassium, it's going to bind to those specific gustatory cells, right? And that's going to that's the tastant, okay? And that's basically what it's picking up. And when it comes to salt and sour, it's basically a sodium gated channel that opens up, or an acidic gated channel that opens up, and boom, it sends the action potential back to the brain to interpret that as salty, sour. Sweet responds to really organic compounds like glucose. Okay, it's organic. Artificial sweeteners, which mimic glucose's structure. Bitter is alkaloids. Unsweetened chocolate is a fantastic example of an alkaloid. Umami is basically amino acids. And amino acids is in protein, and protein is meat. Okay, amino acids, alkaloids, organic compounds like glucose. These two act the same way, okay? The ion binds to it and opens up those gated channels, sends that impulse back. Again, it's sodium voltage gated channels, to cause the action potential. These 3 act in very similar fashion, okay? These 3 all open up a secondary pathway. And that causes, the potentiation for this one to be sent back, okay? And that's what I talk about here, okay? Very general, very general. These act the same. These 2 act the same. Again, I'm not going to have you go into all the secondary messenger systems involved with this complex at all. I just want you to have a general kind of understanding. When it comes to salt and sour, why are they so fast and in your face? Because they open ion channels, and that happens very quickly. If we have a G protein coupled receptor, The tastant binds the receptor, it opens it, causes a secondary messenger to be produced, which heads into the cell. And then that cell is what enhances the sending out of an action potential. That takes time. How much time? Milliseconds, but still it's time. Okay. So that's why the sense of salty or sour is so like, oh my God. It's like, bam, it hits you upside the face with a 2x4. And some of the other tastes there, bitter, sweet, umami, a little bit more slow to hit. Okay. Now, with that said, I'm going to go on a freaking sidebar here. If you introduce foods at 6 months or 4 months to your kid, and you introduce sweet foods first, you actually hardwire their interpretation of taste to be like more sweet stuff instead of more kind of alkaloidish, umami-ish. It's not to say that they can't do it, because it will hardwire them to have a fondness for sweet stuff instead of vegetables, which are not sweet. Okay. They have a more kind of bitterish taste to them. So when you start to introduce food to a child, you usually introduce vegetables first before you start introducing a lot of, sugary sweet stuff. And hopefully, God willing, you're not doing, candy, but you're doing fruit. But still, you don't want to, because it's such a robust taste for these children the very first time that they're tasting it. You actually kind of hardwire some pleasure regions in the brain to really only go for sweet instead of going for some of the more alkaloidish tastes that are within vegetables. So that's something that's pretty interesting there. Where does this go? Well, from these gustatory cells, it basically heads back into the medulla oblongata. Okay. That's where we send our information. And then in our medulla, it's going to do a number of different things. It could send it to the gustatory cortex. It can actually send it to a limbic region involved with memory. It can send it to a reflex to cause you to vomit. That's more associated with bitter. Or it can send it to receptors there within the medulla oblongata that are involved with triggering more saliva and your stomach to start secreting. So the pathways here, I'm going to, if I do ask them, be really general when it comes to these guys. But to be honest, if I can be honest, vision, hearing, balance and equilibrium, they are so much more dynamic. There's so much more within them. Those are the ones that I like to ask or potentially ask. Okay. If I was to ask one of these guys, it wouldn't necessarily be a short answer question. It would be probably a fabulous multiple choice type question. Okay. That's where I like to do. Okay. There's a lot of good multiple choice questions here, matching questions here. Not necessarily a lot of fantastic short answer questions. Just give you that information right up front. And here you can see they're kind of combining the pathways here of taste and as well as, smell. Smell's going to go up here too, right? So that's why these two are so tied together and actually both play a part in your ability to interpret what you think is tasty. Another one too is vision. Vision plays a part in it as well. We don't really truly understand. I guess, you're like, how can vision do that? If something looks like crap, are you going to eat it? No. Are you going to eat black ketchup? No, you're not. I think they tried it on the market many, 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 many years ago. They tried making a whole bunch of varied colors when it came to ketchup. But what do people eat? People only eat red ketchup. So much hate in the world, right?